Count that as a benefit. And normally, March meeting would be a regional meeting, and as a deputy whose family have got very strong regional roots, I'm sorry that is not happening that way, but I'm really delighted that the first half of this meeting will be dominated by hustings. Now, there has been talk about various constitutional attempts with the board, etc. The way to improve the board is not to focus on the board, but to focus on the work of the board and to make sure that we do that work and deliver that service to the community in the best way possible. So therefore, I'm absolutely delighted that we actually are having hustings, which is the first time I can call it before a general election. I'll go into more detail about the rules of the hustings when the speakers are here and when we're actually about to start. The hustings will start at about 11:15. So in the meantime, we're going to get through as much of the routine business board as we can before we're interrupted. So I'm going to deal with the first basic business, and just as an aside to that, we have constitutional matters that was sent out earlier on just after the last meeting of the board, did not meet the constitutional requirements, but the matters contained in that resolution will be discussed. They do have to be discussed, and it's important. I'm saying this now at the end of the triennium, and there will be more about this, but I do, as we're coming towards the end, just how much I love the board and the work that the board is doing, and how excited I am that we've managed to get these hustings together. And I want to thank the staff at this point for their excellent work on this. They're really tireless energy that they put into putting this together. I think it's so important. I think it's so important that the community is represented by a genuinely democratic body, and this is exactly what the board should be about. So before we actually get onto the hustings, let me deal with the ordinary day-to-day sort of management of the board. First of all, we have the minutes, which we've circulated, of the last plenary meeting. And we have not been we have not been notified of any corrections to the minutes, so I'm going to accept those as approved by the board as a true record of the meeting. Next, we've got announcements. You've all seen, but I'm going to repeat, a Mazal Tov to Roger Winfield on his son's marriage, condolences to Avril Lapin on the loss of her sister, and a farewell to Wally Leaf. You've seen my comments there. If I just may mention, Wally and I do not always see eye to eye, particularly on matters relating to Israel. But I have to applaud his tireless energy here on Israel's behalf. I don't know if Wally's here, but even in his absence, I will say it. I was once cycling on a charity bike ride in Thailand, and between water stops, it was about an hour of cycling, and I wasn't picking up my emails between the water stops, but when I got to the second one, there were 19 emails from Wally, all about Israel, keeping me on my toes and doing his tireless work for Israel advocacy. So let's hope he'll continue with that work, and he obviously will be missed at the board. Mazal Tov to Linda and Donald Sharp on their 50th wedding anniversary. And Mazal Tov to Marilyn Rose, who's on a bar mitzvah of a youngest grandchild. Condolences, this is something we hadn't picked up, to David Freeman, who was quite an eminent solicitor, and the Times saw it as important to point out that he had been a member of the Board of Deputies for a number of years. So condolences to his family. And finally, congratulations from Simone Klaas for the award on behalf of her community. You've had a list of most of the activities that we've been involved in the last 4 weeks since we had the last plenary. I attended the service at St. Paul's, which I didn't mention then because it only happened the day before yesterday, representing the Jewish community as a senior representative of the Jewish community there, and we did actually have a role to play in the service. The leaders of the World Faith Organizations actually played a part in the responses to the various questions, to various statements that were made, and were actually in a procession. I thought it was a very dignified service. I thought it was a very serious cause that they were commemorating, the war on Afghanistan. I was glad to see that Her Majesty the Queen was represented there, as were all the major parties and the major faiths, and that real respect was given to the non-Christian faith, but particularly, I think, to us as Jews. We're going to start the hustings in a moment when we have the speakers coming in. I'm actually going to take, as soon as the hustings are over, I'm going to take questions on the President's statement. I'm going to take questions also on the executive report. And in particular, I'll take questions, supplementaries, from those people who've asked questions where we provided written answers. And if people want to ask a supplementary on that, we'll take questions. One of the innovations that was discussed at our meeting back in December and has been agreed was that each of the divisions would report at every plenary. So you will have in front of you reports from the International Division, the Defence Division, and the Community Issues Division. The one division which has not reported for this plenary, obviously, is the Finance and Organisation Division, because they presented their full report at the very last plenary in February. So you will actually be able to ask questions on those reports at the end of the meeting. I gather our speakers have all arrived, and yes, and they will be escorted to the podium now when they're actually coming in. And the HOs will be going to the front row there. Yes, yes. I think you... yeah. Feel rather uncomfortable being here in lonely glory, but not for long. Lionel. I do apologize if I said that the Queen was represented at the service was on Friday. She wasn't represented. She was there in Poison herself, as you will have seen from all the pictures on the BBC. And I'm repeating this, but the royal family was sitting, organisations was sitting where sat and where Alex sat. So the real to them. You're very kind. Our speakers are now coming in. Let's just welcome them. Yes, you have. Yep. Yes. Thank you. Oh, well done to you. Hi.
When we go to questions, Phil and I have got the mic, so we'll go to them. Okay, just tell them to put their hands up.
First of all, I'd like to welcome our speakers and to thank you for giving up part of your Sunday to be with us. We have with us today representatives of Conservative, Labour, Lib Dem and the Greens. I would make the point that UKIP were asked to send a representative and wanted very much to send one. They talked of Nigel Farage, you may have heard of him, coming here. Unfortunately, that has not proved possible, but it was not, they're not absent out of choice. Now, first of all, I'm going to advise our speakers, and obviously deputies are aware of this. There'll be members of the press and other media present here, so be warned of that. And these proceedings, like all proceedings of the Board of Deputy, are live streamed. So in addition to the people actually present in the hall, there are people all around the world who will be sort of tuning in to this debate. And we do get feedback, very rapid feedback, not only from our community, but from our viewers as far away as Cape Town, Tel Aviv, and even some insomniacs in Melbourne. So be careful what you say. This is totally public. Now, I'm going to be very strict on the timing and the general running of these proceedings. First, for the speakers, you will each be given 3 minutes. And I will have to stop you after that. I will try and warn you when 2.5 minutes have been exceeded. After you have all spoken, I'm going to call for questions, and I'm going to make 3 points about these questions. We have been notified about them in advance, but I want everybody to be clear. First of all, we're Jews in this country, are normal citizens, and are naturally concerned with all the issues that concern normal citizens, and will vote very much according to those issues. But these are hustings for the Jewish community, and therefore the questions receive will all be ones which have a clear relevance to the Jewish community. They may, in a couple of cases, actually touch on fundamental issues like human rights, but these are ones of deep relevance to the Jewish community. So if you prepared long speeches about inflation or cost of living, forget it, it's not going to come up. Secondly, the questions are going to be addressed to all of the speakers. Now, naturally, the political parties have different records on matters that concern the Jewish community, but in these hustings, you're all going to be equal. So all the questions that are put up will be answered by all of our speakers, not just by those who the questioner may have had in mind. And thirdly, this is naturally something one has to say to a Jewish audience, perhaps to any audience, but questions are questions. They're not statements. And even if a statement has a question mark at the end, it won't qualify as a question. So they're all actually, and the ones that we have are all actually, they're formulated as questions. The speakers will be the people who formulated their questions, and as deputies always do, they will stick tightly to their script. Deputies always do that. They only have a limited time for their questions. Deputies appreciate that. You speakers will have a minute to answer, and our deputies are always very happy to observe time limits. They have 2.5 minutes when they make their speeches. You will have 3 minutes at the beginning. So I hope that's clear to everyone. We have some very senior people here, senior men. I'm afraid they are all blokes, and among them real good friends of the community. They are, first of all, from the Conservatives, the Right Honourable Sajid Javid. He's the MP for Bromsgrove and for Culture, Media and Sport. For Labour, we have Stephen Twigg, MP for Liverpool West Derby and Shadow Justice Minister, responsible for political and constitutional reform. For the Liberal Democrats, we have the Right Honourable Tom Brake, MP for Carshalton and Wallington and Deputy Leader of the House of Commons. And for the Green Party, we have Benali Hamdacha, I hope I pronounced that correctly, Equality spokesperson and representative of LGBT. Now, I'm going to call on them in the order in which I've just read out. So I'm going to begin by inviting the Right Honourable Sajid Javid MP to address us.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. President. And thank you to the board for putting on these hustings and for giving me and my friends here an opportunity to speak to you. The next election is going to be a very stark choice. Yes, there's lots of parties you can vote for, but at the end of the day, we all know there can only be one of two possible outcomes in terms of leadership. Either David Cameron stays in number 10 Downing Street, or Ed Miliband takes over. That is what the country is facing. Now, when you think of it like that, and those two individuals, in terms of what they stand for, their abilities, the visions that they have, I think the choice could not be more stark for the future of our country. In short, it's competence versus chaos. If you look at the last 5 years and what has been achieved under a Conservative-led government, under David Cameron's leadership, I think it helps to spell out what the next 5 years might look at. And I'll just pick three things very quickly. First of all, prosperity. Back in 2010, we were economically on our knees. Our situation is hard to see how it could have been more difficult. Since then, we've had the fastest growth of any major developed country last year. We are the jobs factory of Europe. Last year, in the last 5 years, we had more jobs created in Britain than all other countries in Europe combined. And that is the best way that we can help poor people out of poverty, improve their life chances, and help them with the challenges they face, such as cost of living. The second issue I'd highlight is stronger public services. Whatever they are, whether we want a stronger NHS, like I do, better education, whatever your priorities are for public services, they can only be funded if we have a strong economy. And then thirdly, David Cameron has shown strong leadership, not just at home, but also abroad. We face significant challenges abroad, international terrorism, even close to our borders, those horrific attacks we saw very recently in Paris, but also what's going on in the Middle East. We have a resurgent Russia, and we need someone to stand up to that. And we have to stand up for our own rights in the EU and call for the sensible reforms that we need. And again, David Cameron has shown leadership with that. So strong leadership at home and abroad. So in short, we have a long-term plan for this country. We're not even halfway through that plan. But if we abandon that plan and go back, then the country will also go back. And the best way forward is to stick with that plan. And when we face that choice, think of it in those stark terms. Is David Cameron versus Ed Miliband? The competence of David Cameron, continued prosperity, dealing with our challenges, or more chaos under Ed Miliband, more borrowing, more debt, and more spending? Thank you.
And for sticking within your time. The red sign that comes up on the traffic lights is for 2.5 minutes. So, and I've actually been working on my stopwatch. So don't worry, chaps. When that red light comes up, it's simply a warning that you have 30 seconds to go. We're not as generous with our deputies as we are with you. And our deputies love it. They love being cut short. Thanks. Right. But red is a warning, and actually I have a little bit of paper which I've written out, which is a second warning, but that's to say 30 seconds. But that only means you've done 2.5 minutes, and you have a total of 3 minutes. I'm now going to call on Stephen Twigg MP to address us.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and good morning, everyone. It's superb to be here with you at the Board of Deputies, and I'm looking forward to answering your questions. I hope you'll bear with me if I start with a personal reflection. For me, personally, the Jewish community and Jewish friends have always had a very big influence on my politics as they've developed over the years. Growing up in Southgate, joining the Labour Party in Southgate, then my time at Oxford and in the National Union of Students, I always had very strong support and friendship with the Jewish community, and I hope that it's helped me understand better some of the issues raised in this manifesto. I welcome the manifesto that the board has published. It is an excellent manifesto with 10 points, which I'm very happy to subscribe to and which the Labour Party supports, and I'm sure we'll go into a number of those points during the questions, but let me highlight 2 of them. One is to echo something that Sajid said, which is to address the issue of hate crime and anti-Semitism following the attacks in Paris and in Copenhagen. We know that we have seen a rise in appalling anti-Semitism across Europe, including in our own country. And I think it is absolutely vital that politicians from all parties send out a very clear message about how we celebrate our country's diversity and we celebrate the central role role that the Jewish community plays in our country. And to give one example of a really important policy commitment that's been made, that is to reaffirm our commitment to the funding for CST for the Jewish schools, because it is so important that children attending and staff working in Jewish schools have the protection that they deserve so they can go safely to and from schools. So I welcome that commitment in the manifesto. The second is the international commitment on the Middle East. It is so vitally important, and I'm sure we'll go into this in more detail in questions, that we see progress towards a settlement of the Middle East question. And with the Israeli election in 2 days' time and our election in 2 months' time, I think we have an important opportunity, whoever emerges in government in Israel, whoever emerges in government in this country, for us to reaffirm our commitment to Israel's security and to a two-state settlement that enables us to have a viable Palestinian state living alongside an Israel that is guaranteed its security. We know it won't be easy, but it is absolutely vital that we get there, and I look forward to working with the board and with the Jewish community and others to ensure that we can achieve both of those things.
Thank you very much, Stephen Twigg. I'm now going to call on the Right Honourable Tom Brake MP to address us.
Thank you very much. And the person who was sitting here before me managed to work their way through 6 pills while they were sitting here, so I hope that won't be necessary for me. I want to start perhaps with a personal remark as well, and that is that I have some understanding of the situation in Israel. My wife's sister lives there, and so my sister-in-law, her daughter, is currently doing her military service in Israel, and her son will be doing that in the next couple of years. So I get information about what's happening there through a family route. Now, clearly for the Liberal Democrats, this has been a tough time for us in the last 5 years. The first time that the party has been in government for over 60 years, and elected at a point where the country was facing the largest deficit in the industrialized world, and that required the government to take action. And of course, notwithstanding the attempts by my colleagues to airbrush out the Liberal Democrats out of the coalition in the way that perhaps in the Soviet era, some of those photographs, they snowpacked out the people who were no longer in favour. Clearly, the coalition government is one in which Liberal Democrats and Conservatives have worked together. And so the 2 million extra jobs that have been created, where we as a government have put in place the framework for businesses to enable them to expand in that way, the fact that 2 million apprenticeships have been created, the fact that the UK vies with Germany in terms of having the largest growth in its economy, that is because the Liberal Democrats have been working hand in hand with Conservative colleagues, with some Liberal Democrat ministers in senior positions, whether it's Vince Cable or Ed Davey at Energy and Climate Change, helping that agenda. So what we have tried to do in government is build a stronger economy and a fairer society. And the second half of that, I think, is very much down to the Liberal Democrats being in coalition. So the measures such as free school meals for children, the pupil premium, which has invested $2.5 billion in the children who need the most assistance at school, and for instance, the fact that the tax threshold has gone up for 25 million people, so that nearly 25 million people are paying less tax as a result of our policies, and the fact that 3 million people have been taken out of tax altogether. Again, that is something that has been delivered thanks to the Liberal Democrats in government. Prior to the general election, of course, David Cameron said it was not achievable. Well, I'm very pleased that we've not only achieved it, but in fact we've overshot our target, in that from the 1st of April, it'll be £10,500 that everyone is able to earn before they have to pay any tax on their income. So these are some of the things that we've achieved. We want to carry on achieving that in the future government, with a priority of addressing the deficit, reducing taxes for people on low and middle incomes, and finally, of course, £8 billion extra investment in the NHS by 2020, which is what Simon Stevens, the boss of NHS England, has said that is required. And that is what Liberal Democrats in government would deliver for you after May the 7th.
Thank you very much. Just in time. Finally, I'm going to call on Benali Hamdasha, I hope I pronounced it correctly.
Hamdash, if it's helpful.
Hamdash, I'm sorry.
Don't worry.
On behalf of the Greens to address us.
Brilliant, and thank you for inviting me to speak today. And I just want to celebrate the fact that these hustings are happening because they are a strong indication of the vibrant and visible British community we have, British Jewish community we have here. And I really want to reinforce that Britain has been enriched and immeasurably bettered for the Jewish community that we have here throughout history. In every field, in every community, we are a better country for the openness and the welcoming attitude that we've had, hopefully, towards our communities that have lived here. But I think as well, I think we have to recognise that Britain hasn't always been an open and welcoming place for British Jews. Back to as far as the 1200s, the expulsions, to the battles of Cable Street, to the anti-Semitic riots in 1947, it's important that Britain recognises it has a legacy of anti-Semitism and it needs to address that. And we owe a debt to the community here. And I think it's important to remember that history at this time when we do face a rising tide of anti-Semitism, a rise in anti-Semitic crime, international atrocities against Jewish communities, as mentioned in France and Copenhagen and elsewhere. And I think in this time, it has never been more important for all political parties to listen to our Jewish community and work hard as partners to address the concerns and issues that you'll be raising here today. I think equally, I want to reinforce that the Green Party really does want to be that partner. And I've read the Jewish Manifesto, and I'm proud to say it's something we can wholeheartedly support. Those 10 key aims and key goals are things that all political parties should be striving towards. And I think particularly it's really important that we recognise that the Green Party is wholeheartedly committed to supporting those cultural institutions, British culture, Jewish cultural life, and is committed to maintaining those. But I do think in this current climate of austerity, of rising climate change, of a creeping hostility towards migration and migrant communities, that is only the Green Party that recognises those threats to the open and inclusive, fair society, I think, that we're all aiming towards. I think we have a government, and indeed across Europe, an ideological commitment to austerity that is driving discrimination and is challenging our goal towards an open, harmonious and cohesive society. I think it is only by providing a strong state that can be involved and be supportive of our communities that we can ensure we have that harmonious, cohesive state we're all aiming towards. We should not be surprised to see the rise of Golden Dawn, Front National and Swedish Democrats in this climate. So I want to say that the Green Party does believe in public services, does believe in a society that works together, that challenges inequality, and I believe that from the Jewish Manifesto and the community that we have here today, I think you believe in that as well, and hopefully we can work as partners to ensure
that. Thank you for keeping strictly within the time, just as our deputies always do. Now, we have been notified of questions, and the first person that I've got on my list here is Natalie. Natalie Shaw.
Thank you very much. Natalie Shaw, Deputy for Barnet United Synagogue. In light of recent events and the growth of extremism, does the press not have a responsibility to be more sensitive in its reporting and to stop glamorising individuals such as the recent coverage for Mohammed Emwazi and the use of the term Jihadi John? Is it really necessary to know where he went to school, ate his breakfast, etc.? What would your party try to do to ensure that coverage of similar matters is more appropriate in future and will not serve to act as a recruitment tool for the likes of ISIS?
Thank you, Natalie. I'm going to ask Stephen Twigg to answer first for that.
Thanks, Natalie, for the question. It's a very good question, a different sort of way of looking at it. So I'm sitting here thinking about my answer. I think the first thing I want to say is politicians should always be extremely careful about anything that is an incursion on the freedom of the media. I think we have every right to have a debate around media coverage and be critical of that coverage. But I think as politicians, we need to be very careful about anything that could smack of us actually interfering in the media other than within the laws that we already have. I found myself thinking about what you said in terms of talking about the backgrounds of some of the people who end up in these extremist and terrorist organizations. And I think I have a mixed feeling, because I entirely see what you mean about being very, very careful about that kind of coverage and the risk that it normalizes or glamorizes. On the other hand, I think we have to have an understanding of what some of the things are that lead people to do some terrible, terrible things as part of our strategy for preventing those things from happening in the first place. And I think, for me, education is one of the most important tools that we have to try to prevent those things from happening again in the first place, and the media could play a positive role alongside schools and others in doing that.
Thank you very much. Tom Brake.
Well, like Stephen, I do share his concerns at the prospect of clamping down on the freedom of the press to report. However, clearly I want them to report responsibly. And I think in relation to too many of these incidents, they are giving, in my view, far too much coverage, and in the way that Natalie suggested, perhaps glamorizing things that most of us find absolutely appalling. I think the companies like Facebook and Twitter do have a responsibility to act much more quickly in relation to material that finds its way into their media, and I wish that they would do that. What the government have done from a security point of view has, for instance, taken down, I think, more website pages than ever before of material that nobody should want to see and nobody should be able to see. But just to go back to the beginning, I think that freedom of the press in this country is something that we cherish, and we should be very careful of trying to restrict it.
Thank you, Tom. You've got your minutes. I'm going to make sure the speakers, they have already stuck to it, but always remember, it's just 1 minute to answer. Benali.
Sure. Well, I think one of the key things that particularly the Green Party has been talking about is media reform. We do have a clear issue that huge amounts of the media are owned by very small amounts of individuals, and I think particularly breaking up and allowing for more plurality of media can make sure that we have a better functioning media that more adequately reflects the kind of coverage that I think we're all looking to see. I also want to reflect as well on social media. I think Facebook and Twitter have been, unfortunately, quite pernicious tools for spreading what is a hateful Islamist fascist ideology. And I think these platforms have to be a lot more aggressive in dealing with accounts and providers that are disseminating hateful language. And certainly I think Facebook's reticence in dealing with that was deeply troubling. So I just want to media reform and social media are the two key planks I think that are quite important on those steps.
Thank you very much. Finally, Sajid.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, extremism, sadly, is a growing problem in our society and in fact, many other countries. So we must do everything we possibly can to combat it. Some of the measures already taken, such as banning people that want to come to our country with a poisonous ideology, 84 people already banned by the Home Secretary in the last 5 years, making sure we have travel bans, for example, people that go to Syria or Iraq or anywhere else to commit terror, and also making sure our security agencies, police, are properly funded. On the issue of the press and the role of the press, I believe in freedom of the press, and I think when you say that, you can't have ifs, ands, and buts and things. You either believe in it or you don't. That means sometimes there will be things in the press that you don't like. I've often picked up a newspaper and read something sometimes about myself, and I don't like it. I turn the other page, or I don't buy that paper again. But I believe very much in their freedom, and that still is consistent with wanting a press, or whether it's printed or online, that behaves more responsibly. But when it comes to the press and redress, it should be a self-regulation system, and I don't think we should move away from that.
Thank you very much. The next question I have now, some people have raised their hands because presumably they would like to ask a question. I'd be delighted to call on you. We have been notified of 7 questions in advance, and naturally...
Green candidate.
Oh, no, you've answered, haven't you?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes. See, yeah,
Yeah,
we're paying attention to what they're saying here very carefully, yes. And so I'd love to call on everybody who's raised their hand, but first I'm going to give priority to the 7 people who actually submitted questions in advance. So if you're not called upon, I'm afraid it's because of time, and it's for no other reason. The next question which we've been notified of is from Roger Kuczynski. Roger, if you can
Roger Kaczynski, Radlett Reformed Synagogue. To the panel. The European Convention of Human Rights was introduced in 1950 as a direct consequence of the Nazi Holocaust to prevent fundamental freedoms ever again being violated on the grounds of race, creed, or religion. Could you please confirm that the parties that you represent will not withdraw from this convention, the maintenance of which, in the view of our history, is of such importance to Jews?
Right, for this question, I'm going to ask Sajid Javid to begin with the answers.
Yes, thank you for the question. No, I can't confirm that. And the reason I can't is as follows. I mean, first of all, the reason it was introduced is exactly as you say. In the aftermath of the Second World War, it was absolutely right to try and bind as many countries as possible in Europe in the support of basic civil freedoms and human rights. And it was fantastic that Winston Churchill and other British people played such an important role in that. But what's happened since then is you have an organization which in many ways doesn't really stand up for human rights in the way that it was envisaged. It's something that I would call, I can't think of a better word, there's judicial overreach. It's got a number of countries in there. Many of them have no respect whatsoever for human rights in their own countries. And there have been a number of examples. I can think during my time in Parliament in the last 5 years, for example, when we're dictated to about giving prisoners the vote, for example, when we've had terrorists, convicted terrorists that we can't send outside of our country. And I think these kinds of issues need to be dealt with. And one of the things that should be looked at is having a British legislation which protects our human rights and not necessarily always relying on the ECHR.
Thank you. Tom Brake.
Well, yes, I can guarantee with the Liberal Democrats we would fight.
Oh, sorry.
The Liberal Democrats would most definitely fight to safeguard the ECHR. The UK, as you will know, was very heavily involved at the outset of this and played a major role in drawing it together. If there is, for instance, as Sajid has said, judicial overreach, then yes, let's try and reform it. But the idea that we would be helping to safeguard human rights around Europe, for instance, by pulling out of it, I think is simply not true. And I think the impact of it would be the UK's withdrawal would actually give a major boost to many countries around Europe who don't want to respect human rights, and they would point to the British example as a way of justifying the actions they would then subsequently take in terms of disregarding human rights in their own country. So I think it would be a major mistake.
Thank you very much. Benali.
I just want to echo Tom's comments. I mean, the ECHR is a vital tool for fighting discrimination across Europe, and withdrawing from that convention would set a dangerous precedent for across Europe. It's been a brilliant tool for pushing human rights across Europe, and if we withdrew, you would find European countries using our example to withdraw from conventions and not enforce the progressive legislation that we've seen come out of ECHR. And I think it's a deep irony that the party of Churchill, who was pioneering and leading on actually getting this instituted, is actually looking to withdraw from this convention. So I'd say the Greens are hugely committed to making sure that the ECHR is implemented and supported. And I think we actually have to challenge, it goes back a little bit to the previous question on media reform, we have to challenge the lazy reporting regarding human rights and actually break through some of the stereotypes and misconceptions about what this court does.
Thank you very much for that. Finally, Stephen Twigg.
I think it's truly tragic that the Conservatives are breaking a long-standing consensus about this. One of my predecessors in West Derby was a Conservative MP, David Maxwell Fyfe, who was one of the prosecutors at Nuremberg and helped to shape the European Convention on Human Rights. As Tom said, if there are problems with the judicial oversight, which sometimes there are, and problems with the quality of some of the judges, which sometimes there is, we need to reform those things from within, not to leave. How can we lecture countries like Russia and Turkey that are part of the Council of Europe, about whom there are serious human rights concerns, if we ourselves are turning our backs on the European Convention on Human Rights? And I would urge the Conservatives to reconsider this position that they've taken. It's a populist position that I think breaks a long-standing consensus that exists for a good reason.
Thank you very much for this. Our next question comes from Tal Ofer. Tal, will you get a mic?
Talofa for Chigwell and Hainaut Synagogue. My question for the panel is, what is your party is planning to do to address the intimidation of Jewish students on campuses, and how do you plan to tackle hate preachers being invited to speak at universities?
Okay, Tom Brake, would you like a chance to answer that first?
Yes. I mean, first of all, on the sort of associated issue of security at Jewish schools, I'm very pleased that Nick Clegg announced that the additional security fund would be maintained and something that we would support up to, the Liberal Democrats would support up to 2020. In relation to the intimidation of Jewish students, clearly there is a debate in government about the statutory duty being placed on universities, for instance. I think our position on the issue is that we want universities to have flexibility, first of all, to establish, clearly we would want them to exclude speakers who are inciting hatred or violence, but there will also be speakers whose views are highly controversial, where it may actually be to the advantage of everybody to allow that person to speak and allow others to respond to those points and actually challenge them. That can be just as an effective way of challenging controversial views as banning them from speaking in the first place. And of course, the risk of banning someone from speaking is that simply that activity happens off campus and therefore you don't actually stop the person speaking. So it's a very difficult balance to make between ensuring that the right to freedom of speech is available, the right to challenge someone's view is available, but also stopping incitement to hatred, which clearly we don't want to allow.
Thank you very much. Benali Hamdash.
I was deeply concerned to see recently University of Westminster inviting a preacher who was pro-FGM and had spoken strongly out about the criminalisation of homosexuality. I think that's an example of where universities are inviting people who are preaching deeply problematic and indeed, I think in this example, violence against women. And we have to recognise as well that for many students, universities are their home. When these speakers are invited to talk on a platform, they are being invited into the very heart of where they live, their communities. And I think universities have to recognise that that is a deeply problematic step. I think as well we have to push our university societies and our student movements to recognise that anti-Semitism shouldn't be a second thought in its anti-racism movements. And I certainly think that we should all be taking a strong stance against anti-Semitism in our societies. And I think we do have to balance free speech between what are deeply problematic views, and I think we have to be aggressive when that does cross that line into hate speech and be unapologetic to say that platforms shouldn't be granted to those who do preach hate speech.
Thank you very much. Stephen Twigg.
I think the starting point must be that universities should be a place where all students can feel that they can safely go about their lives and have their identities. And there is a balance here. There is a tension between complete freedom of speech and providing that security. What I find heartbreaking about this is, of course, this is nothing new. I remember back in the days when I was involved in student unions and NUS in the late 1980s and early 90s, and we had groups that were pushing for the banning of Jewish societies because of a false equation between Zionism and racism. Jewish students have had to put up with this level of hostility and prejudice for decades in this country. The form might change decade by decade, but the reality doesn't. And I think universities, bluntly, need to do a lot more than they're doing at the moment. I don't think the universities take this problem as seriously as they should do. I think there's a limit to what government can do. Government should do all that it can. But in the end, it's actually in the individual universities that the protection needs to be provided. And I would urge the universities to do a lot more to ensure that that students can feel safe from all forms of prejudice, but including anti-Semitism.
Thank you very much. Finally, Sajid David.
Yeah, yes, Stephen is absolutely right. I remember at university some 20 years ago, the problem, that's when I went to my first UJS event with some friends, and the problems that existed then. It's a really sad reflection, frankly, on society that we're still discussing these issues 2 decades on. Now, what can we do about it? As Stephen said, there's no magic answer to this, but we've got to keep trying everything we can. So that means, for example, banning hate preachers from abroad. If they're coming here to spread a poisonous ideology, they're not welcome in our country. It means making sure that security that is required in our universities and colleges, that Jewish students feel comfortable and that they have the security that they need. And it means, overall, a completely zero-tolerance approach to this kind of hatred.
Thank you very much. Our next question comes from Dori Schmetterling.
Dori Schmetterling, New West End Synagogue, Bayswater. My question regards shechitah, Jewish religious slaughter, which meets European Union requirements on stunning and is at least as humane as other methods. Will your political party resist all attempts to make the pre-stunning, which itself has major problems such as missed bolts and electrocution of animals, the pre-stunning of animals, mandatory, which would make Jewish religious slaughter impossible? So would you make pre-stunning mandatory, which would make shechitah impossible?
Thank you very much, Dori, for that question. I'm first going to call on Benali Hamdash.
Hi. I just want to clarify something, because I have seen it reported that the Green Party's policy is to ban kosher meat, and I just want to make that very clear that it is not Green Party policy. That was actually voted against at Green Party conference a year and a half ago, particularly because of these concerns. I certainly know I'm raised in a Muslim household, and halal meat would equally face a similar problem. So it is not our policy to ban kosher or halal meat. And I certainly think it is deeply problematic when you have certain political parties that are advancing bans on what are integral parts of our cultural practices. And certainly for any political party to referencing bans to kosher meat as collateral damage in a pursuit against a certain other community is deeply problematic. I see we need to be supporting kosher and halal meat, and we need to be challenging some of the horrible misconceptions that are out there. And as you've mentioned, stunning is not a cure-all to animal cruelty. Certainly we see that it can be just as deeply problematic as any kind of other slaughter. And actually kosher and halal meat have a long legacy of valuing humane culling of animals. So I think we have to challenge some of the misinformation out there and actually redress that.
Thank you very much for that. Sajid Javid.
Yeah, no, thank you. First of all, I'm very familiar with halal meat, which, as you'll know, is the practices are not too dissimilar. And so this issue cuts across a number of communities, and in my mind it's absolutely clear. And my starting point is this: a civilized society is judged by how it treats its minorities. That is absolutely essential if you want to claim to be civilized. And when we look at the practices, and this is one good example of a religious minority in our country. If you take the Jewish people in our country for centuries, actually in many ways have been a model of integration, but that does not mean that they need to give up their deeply held religious principles in any way whatsoever. So I have no time for any changes in this practice, no time for a ban. It would not happen under the Conservatives.
Stephen Twigg.
I think we may have cross-party consensus on this question, because I agree entirely with the answers that were given and the way in which the case was made by both the Greens and the Conservatives on this one. I think respect for minorities is very important. I think in the manifesto that we're talking about this morning, the first point is around respect for Jewish community traditions, and I think that is absolutely of vital importance. There is no question of a Labour government supporting such a ban. It is a completely unacceptable proposal which we reject.
Thank you very much for that. Finally, Tom Brake.
Yes, I question at least we'll have achieved political consensus. Doesn't happen very often. So here's the grand coalition of all parties. So I'm very proud of the focus that we put on animal welfare in this country, and I'm proud of the fact that we allow religious slaughter, and certainly under the Liberal Democrats, we would continue to allow that to happen. One area where perhaps there's less consensus is the issue of comprehensive labelling and whether there is a case for setting out in labelling exactly the way in which slaughter has been carried out. If it was comprehensive, I must say that I think it would be completely confusing for the consumer, who would be faced with a very large variety of different methods of slaughtering their meat. And I'm not convinced, therefore, that the public would be that much better informed if comprehensive labelling were to be introduced.
Well, thank you very much for that, all of you. I think we'll chalk this up as another achievement of the Board of Deputies. We've achieved a cross-party consensus on one issue, and I assure you, for those of us who are meat lovers, this is something of some importance. So thank you to all of you for that. Unfortunately, the fifth party was not here, so we haven't been able to interrogate them on their policy on this issue. Our next question comes from Joe Millis. Joe, where are you?
Joe Millis, Bromley Reformed Synagogue. Why should all taxpayers fund faith schools that do not allow the children of all taxpayers to attend?
Okay, it's a nice question. I'm going to start with you, Tom Brake.
I'm glad you started with me for the most controversial question so far. It's a
Tom, can you...
Right.
Mike.
Yeah, well, as I said, I'm glad you started with me for the most controversial question we've had so far. Why should all taxpayers fund faith schools that are not accessible to all? I suppose that in relation to the tax system generally, we are all funding things that in many respects we don't access, whether it's people who are funding the health service who don't need to use it, whether it's people who are funding schools who don't have children. So clearly this is something that is going to happen. I think there is an issue about ensuring that faith schools, certainly state faith schools, are accessible to wider groups than just the representatives of a particular faith. And I think that is something that I support because I think that it's important that we allow a wide cross-section of young people to be taught in the same schools to enable there not to be perhaps exclusivity, which I don't think is necessarily very helpful in terms of building a sort of multicultural, multi-faith society.
Thank you very much for that, Tom. Banali Hamdash.
So, yes, quite a controversial question. Certainly I know in my schooling, I went to Sunday school for Arabic school and went to a mainstream school in the week. The Green Party policy is certainly, as Tom said, about opening up and making sure that all schools are inclusive to all communities. And I certainly think that is a strong need. I think that certainly breaking down barriers between communities will fundamentally help towards cohesion. But I do think faith schools play a hugely important role in making sure that we are celebrating our cultural lives, we are conveying religious constitution. Certainly that my Arabic school is an important part of my growing up and my becoming who I am. So I do think that perhaps there is something to be looked at in terms of taxpayer funding for faith schools. It is party policy to look at reviewing that, which might be controversial here, but certainly we want to talk to the partners that are out there and providing those services, because these schools do provide hugely important services to the community.
Thank you very much. Sajid Javid.
I think faith schools clearly are a hugely important part of the education system that we have in our country. I remember when my brother switched school once, as a Muslim, he went to a Church of England school, and it was great for him in terms of education, what it did for him. I like to think it was good for that school as well. Having said that, it should be up to each faith school what kind of policy they want on faith and whether they want to mix it a bit or not. I think the important thing is that all communities are allowed and have the opportunity to set up their faith schools. That's why I think it's fair that taxpayers fund it, because if all communities give the opportunity, but I think a school should not be forced to take people of other faiths, because if that's what they need to do, protect their ethos and their faith, then they should be allowed to make it exclusive.
Thank you very much for that. Finally, Stephen Twigg.
I think we should remember that in this country, the churches provided schools well before the state got involved in the provision of education. So faith education has been in our system for centuries, and it is only right, as Sajid just says, that religions other than Christianity are given an equal basis for doing so. And I've been hugely impressed by Jewish schools. In my former constituency, Wolfson Hillel School is a fantastic school. I was delighted as a minister to give the green light to JCOS and to visit recently and see how brilliantly it is doing. The Jewish schools are an important part of the diversity of education, but I do agree that we also want to find ways to break down barriers. Now, I don't think you break down barriers by saying that you don't fund the faith schools. I think that would be wrong, but I think encouraging links between different schools that break down some of that may exist between different communities, that is something very positive. And I've seen great examples over the years, for example, of Jewish and Muslim schools or Jewish and Christian schools building those links so they learn more about each other's communities. But I think the Jewish faith schools are an important part of the diversity of provision and should remain so.
Thank you very much for that to all of you. David Behrens is our next questioner. David?
Thank you, David Behrens, representative of the JNF. My question is, can the candidates confirm that their party will have a zero-tolerance policy towards the boycott, divestment and sanctions movement against Israel, which is in reality loosely veiled anti-Semitism?
Right. I'm going to start with Sajid Javid on this.
Yep. Thank you. Look, I've got no room with cultural boycotts at all. I made a speech on this recently where I went into quite some details to the Union of Jewish Students, where I talked about art in that case, cultural boycotts, educational boycotts, divestments. The answer is the same. In the case of art, for example, art is for all. It tells us about who we are, and there's no room for boycotts. Unfortunately, in the art world, we have seen some boycotts. Edinburgh Festival, we saw in London with the Tricycle Theatre, where they tried to kick out the UK Jewish Film Festival. I intervened. I thought it was totally, utterly unacceptable. It was wrong, and I made it absolutely clear what might happen to their funding if they ever tried or anyone tried like that again. There is no tolerance whatsoever. And can I just agree with the gentleman, it is a form of the oldest hatred in the world, and it is totally unacceptable.
Thank you for that. Stephen Twigg.
I absolutely agree. I think there is no place for campaigns for boycotts and for sanctions. And if we're looking at this in the context of the situation in the Middle East and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, if we are going to achieve what the manifesto calls for, which is a lasting two-state solution with a viable Palestinian state alongside a secure state of Israel, we're not going to achieve that through boycotts. It's going to be achieved through dialogue, through people working together, greater understanding between peoples. All that boycotts do is to promote hostility, to promote gap, not to encourage people to work together. And of course, we've seen this for decades, attempts to delegitimize Israel, to somehow suggest that Israel and its challenges are unique when there are challenges all over the world. It is completely and utterly unacceptable. And whatever differences there may be about the policies of different governments, the policies of the current Israeli government, and we can have a discussion about that, the Labour Party is very clear. We do not support boycotts, and they are not something that will ever be encouraged by me or by the Labour Party.
Thank you. Benali Hamdash.
Certainly, under the banner of BDS, we've seen some deeply problematic actions. The boycotting of academics, the boycotting of cultural goods like opera and ballet, and certainly that is something to be opposed. And certainly as well, the focus on BDS for Israel is also problematic in that there are many states around the world that are committing atrocities against their people. You look at the state of Saudi Arabia, and why aren't we calling for a boycott against Saudi Arabian products when you have a state there that is slaughtering gay people, that is committing atrocities against its own people, equally Bahrain. So certainly I think we need to focus out and look at human rights as a whole. And I certainly think we need to challenge instances, certainly, for instance, with George Galloway, where he refused to speak with an Israeli speaker. I think those are instances that can't be allowed to be used under the BDS banner.
Thank you very much for that. Finally, Tom Brake.
Well, it looks as though we might have consensus again. Certainly, we do not support the idea of a boycott, certainly a boycott of cultural activities. But I suppose the counterpart to that is that certainly I would want the UK government to do what it can to encourage dialogue between the Israeli government and Abbas, because I think without that dialogue, it is difficult to see how a two-state solution is ever going to be arrived at. Obviously, on Tuesday, the outcome of the election in Israel may provide some pointers as to where the Israeli government is going to go on this issue. It will clearly require Abbas and his government to take the right steps and say the right things in relation to the right for Israel to exist. But that dialogue has got to happen.
Thank you very much for that. For the Board of Deputies has created consensus on two issues. Don't get the wrong impression that we always agree among ourselves on these issues. There are occasional disagreements. Our next question is from Jonathan Neumann. Jonathan, there you are.
Jonathan Neumann, Shomer Yadah Synagogue. Various politicians from across parties condemned Israel for its actions last summer, some even describing Israel's attempts to defend itself as unjustifiable. For each of you, how can supporters of Israel be confident in your party leader's Zionism and in his or her ability to distinguish between elemental good and evil?
Thank you for that. Benali Handash, I'm going to start with you.
Well, as party policy, we do robustly believe in the two-state solution, and certainly, Israel does have a right to challenge violence that it does face. But I also want to look at it slightly broader, in that I do think British foreign policy undermines the existence of Israel. We've seen intervention in Iraq and Libya that has only driven extremism across the area. We have seen the British government support regimes across the Middle East that are deeply problematic and actually act as a barrier towards democratic and wholesome regimes hopefully being instituted. And certainly look at the instance of Tunisia, where we have a hopefully more progressive regime coming in place, and that's thanks to self-liberation, self-movement. But I do think we have to look at all of the policy towards the Middle East and North Africa, and certainly I view intervention in Libya and Iraq as fundamentally undermining the right of Israel and the security of Israel.
Excuse me. Questions will be taken when you're there. Please. Right. Thank you. I'm now going to call on Stephen Twigg for his answer.
Jonathan's question is obviously a very important question about the conduct of foreign policy and the relationship between our country and Israel, and then more broadly the position in the Middle East. And my view as someone who, from whenever I've had an opinion about this, has always regarded myself as a friend of Israel, is that sometimes friends have to be critical. Now, I know that won't always be a popular view, but if the friendship is genuine, and if there is a genuine difference of view about the strategy that's being pursued, then I think it is right, provided it's done in a proper way, that criticism is expressed. How it is expressed, I think is of crucial importance, that it's done in a way that is reasonable, that it's done in a way that is balanced. I know that you will have debates, and the Jewish community has always had debates, about the nature of Israeli government policies and the need for Israel to get these things right. I think what I would say about the experience of last summer, both from the point of view of the position that the Labour Party took and that Ed took, but also the strategy that Israel pursued, is that all of us have lessons to learn from that, and that going forward, what is of absolutely vital importance is that we focus on securing a diplomatic solution that brings about the two states that the manifesto rightly calls for, because neither, going back to the previous question, an approach from the Palestinian side of boycott and military attack is right, but nor do I believe that Israel is ultimately going to get the peace that it deserves and the security that it deserves simply through the use of military force. It's going to require people sitting down and negotiating patiently that two-state solution.
Thank you very much for that. Sajid Javid.
I've been to Israel many times, and I'm acutely aware of the challenges the country faces. I've been both in my previous life in business. In fact, I went there for my honeymoon, and I've also been with the Conservative Friends of Israel. And to me, it's the number of things come out of that. We haven't got enough time, but the first thing is there's lots of things that bind our country and Israel, not least the fact it's the only democracy in the Middle East. It has every right to defend itself. If I lived in a country where there are people next door that fired rockets into my country, killing civilians, well, of course I would retaliate. Of course I would do that. And so we have to see it. We have to see it in that context. Of course, you would expect the retaliation to be responsible, not to be indiscriminate, but every country has the right to defend itself, and why should it be any different for Israel? And the last thing I'd say, when the action, what the gentleman referred to back in, happened last year, remember how David Cameron reacted to that, and what he said, and what Ed Miliband said, and what I said about the stark choice this country faces, the leadership of David Cameron versus the lack of leadership of Ed Miliband.
Thank you for that. Tom Brake, you now get the privilege of being last on this question.
Right, thank you. I also consider myself a friend of Israel. I visited Israel and the West Bank funded by the Friends of Israel, lived on Friends of Israel some years ago, and I've also visited in a private capacity, as I said earlier, with my sister-in-law living there. So I also understand some of the pressures. But as I think Stephen was saying, friends can and should be critical if there is a need to be critical. And it needs to be done in a way and with language that I think is appropriate, again, as Stephen said, and clearly in some cases, or at least in the case of one of my colleagues, that is not happening, and I regret very much that is the case. But for instance, when Israel continues to build settlements that are illegal settlements as recognized by international law, I think friends need to comment on that, because that is clearly not helpful in terms of a peace process. And if we want to, as I think we all do, if there is still time to arrive at a two-state solution, there has to be a willingness on both sides to work to make that happen. That's why I said earlier that there has to be a willingness to talk to Abbas. Clearly there has to be a willingness, most importantly, within the Abbas government for Hamas to give up its pledge to destroy Israel. But we need to see dialogue if there is to be a long-term peaceful solution in Israel that is benefit to the Israelis and to the Palestinians.
Thank you very much for that. I'm afraid, they say about good candidates run out of time, bad candidates run out of material. And similarly with meetings, we are now running out of time. I think it's been a very interesting session so far, but I now do have to say to those people who would like to ask questions, sorry, but we'd be very happy to pass on questions which you send online to the various speakers, but I now have to call on them to give their summaries. As a final speech, I'm going to start in the reverse, or almost the reverse order from which we started at the beginning. So first, Stephen Bernali.
So I want to thank you again for coming here, and they were hugely insightful and I think really important questions I think that need to be addressed. And I'm heartened by certainly on a number of issues that we do have a consensus, particularly I think at the minute on the climate around kosher meat. I think it is important, highly important that we get out there and support and challenge some of the misconceptions out there. And I think truly, we do need to be doing more to celebrate all the communities that we have in Britain and making sure that we are providing a coherent and cohesive message that people can get on board with. And I certainly think that the Green Party can be partners towards that. So thank you very much.
Tom Brake.
Well, I hope that as you're thinking about what to do in the general election, that you will look at what we've done in terms of helping the country to build a stronger economy. That's those 2 million jobs I referred to, the 2 million apprenticeships, doing it in a way that is fair given the financial pressures that we have faced, so introducing free school meals for children, the pupil premium to invest in children who are falling behind, the triple lock for pensioners, which has seen massive increases in people's pensions, and that if you want a party that will continue to reduce the deficit, but do it in a way that is fair, then I hope you'll support the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you.
Thank you. When I spoke at the beginning, I chose to focus on the manifesto rather than giving you the party political spiel, because I suspect you're hearing the party political spiel quite a lot, and I can predict pretty safely you'll hear a lot more of it over the next 7.5 weeks. So I'm not going to go into the economy and the National Health Service and creating a fairer society in conclusion. What I am going to say is that I think there are a number of areas of this manifesto where clearly there is a cross-party consensus, and that is really healthy, because actually what we want to ensure is that the sorts of issues that we're addressing here today aren't ones about which there is big internal debate and controversy. They're actually ones that we can all work together to ensure that Jewish people living here in this country can continue to feel safe, can be given the protection by the state that they have every right to deserve, and that the flourishing contribution that Jews have made to this country for centuries is able to continue in education, in public life, and elsewhere. And that, for me, is the strength of the work the board does, the work that all your communities do day in, day out, and the contribution this manifesto can make to us having an intelligent debate during this forthcoming election. I think whatever party we're in, whatever party we support, hopefully we can all agree that having a more intelligent and mature debate about these very, very important questions is something very healthy and something for us all to celebrate. So thank you very much indeed for inviting us to be here today.
Finally, Sujeev David.
Yeah, once again, thank you very much for the opportunity today. We've managed to discuss a number of issues in the short time we've had, combating extremism, protecting religious freedoms, strengthening faith schools, standing against boycotts, and defending Israel's right to defend itself. When you think of those issues, and perhaps many others that are on your mind that you weren't able to talk about today, again, I think of that stark choice. David Cameron, the Conservatives, Ed Miliband, and Labour. That's the choice you're faced with. Think about what David Cameron has done over the last 5 years, what he's said about all these issues and many others. Competence versus chaos, that's the choice.
Thank you. I'm now calling on Senior Vice President Laura Marks to thank our speakers.
So it's been a really fascinating morning. Thank you so much to our 4 speakers for coming, to Tom Brake, to Sajid Javid, to Stephen Twigg, and to B'nai Hamdash. We really appreciate your coming. We appreciate your interest in our manifesto, in our 10 commitments, to have all read it and taken it on board. And also, I think it was nice to hear all of your personal connections to the Jewish community and your history with it, which I think gave us a sort of insight into you as people and really helped us. We had 7 questions to do with glamorizing jihadists through the media, human rights, faith schools, and the security of Israel. And I'm also very pleased that on 3 areas in particular, very important areas, we had complete consensus on hate preaching on campus, a very big issue for us, on support for kashrut, and finally on boycotts, divestments, and sanctions, which is a big issue facing us as a British community here. And we really appreciate that you came to a consensus on all of those. So finally, I would just say thank you. We know that you've all got your own battles to fight over the next few weeks, so we appreciate you giving up your time. And we also appreciate that it's Mother's Day. You should all be out there with your mothers and at home. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Well done, Tom.
Yes, now we've got the rest of the business of the board, which I'm sure. Thank you. Leonard Bazar, could you please take your seats, everybody? Sir Ivan, Susan, take your seats, as we're now going to deal with the rest of our agenda. You have in front of you the President's statement, and I have actually added to it the service at St. Paul's. I'm now going to take questions on that statement, and in particular, I want particularly to take questions on the themes of the first part of the statement, which deal with anti-Semitism, the problem of extremism, and anti-Israel agitation. So there are a number of items which actually relate to that. My own attendance in Copenhagen, the service in St. Paul's regarding the fallen in Afghanistan, the general election, the trip that I and several other board members made to Paris. And if I may just add by the way, that we saw how the security situation in France is very much worse than it is here. The government in France are deploying a significant part of the French army actually protecting Jewish Jewish sites. And my equivalent officer in France has a large amount of security, which fortunately they don't think I deserve or need. And any other items on the Jewish manifesto? Flo, you had your hand up. Phil, there should be a roving mic. You can take my mic for the moment.
Share the mic with the President any day. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. The service in St. Paul's Cathedral. From a point of view of information, Mr. President, I know there were Jewish servicemen involved in Afghanistan, and I just wondered if you know if any of them fell, and also how many Jewish servicemen were involved. It's something Gabriel will probably know, actually. Thank you.
Gabriel, will you come to the front to and introduce yourself?
Gabriel Kaufman, Association of Jewish Ex-Servicemen and Women of Great Britain. We cannot give you a number, Mr. President, of actually the men who served and women who served in Afghanistan, although Lieutenant Commander Danny Weil was one of them. The names escape me at the moment, but the one that does stick with me is the one Jewish serviceman who lost his life in action, who was Lieutenant Paul Mervis of the Rifles, who gave his life in 2009. An amazing young man and psychology graduate of London University, etc., and who was a fantastic army officer.
Thank you very much. Colin has the mic, and he'll take it round to the questioners. First, I've got Jonathan Hoffman has asked a question, Denise Lest, and then Rosalind Pine.
Jonathan Hoffman, Woodside Park. Can I ask about Southampton University? Yeah?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. President, you're going to see, I note, Southampton University, the aptly named Vice-Chancellor, Professor Nutbeam, on Wednesday about this really horrific anti-Israel conference that the Law Society, or the Law Faculty at Southampton, has organised. They are hiding under the cloak of free speech. They're saying they have to allow this conference to go ahead because of the duty of free speech. That is utterly hypocritical because last year there was an Israeli professor, Professor Mark Auslender, who was due to speak as a scientist at Southampton University, and there was a protest by the anti-Israel group PSC, and they stopped his talk. My question is the following. On Wednesday, will you point out to Professor Nutbeam that the argument of free speech is hypocritical because They did ban this speaker last year. And will you do your best to try and get this really disgusting Israel Hate Fest conference cancelled? Thank you.
Jonathan, it's not I who's going to see the Vice-Chancellor, it's Vice President Jonathan Arkush, and I'm going to ask him to answer your question.
As reported in the report of the Defence Division, if you look at the last bullet point, I shall be leading a delegation to Professor Nutbeam on Wednesday, and I shall make the point which you make. This conference is so one-sided, with approximately 85% of speakers with very strong anti-Israel feelings in their history, that it cannot be described or justified by resort to free speech. The board's position is going to be clear. We insist, as by the way is reported in the Jewish News, and you can see the quote, that the conference should be rebalanced so that it can legitimately be an academic debate which will include views we agree with and with which we disagree. And if the conference cannot be refigured in order to be a respectable academic debate worthy of a proper British university, as Southampton aspires to be, then the conference should not take place. And I would also like to refer to the strong comment made by Eric Pickles, the Secretary of State for Culture, on Friday, which came without any previous reference from us, a very, very welcome statement which we support. So I hope that the deputies will be assured that we will take the strongest possible line consistent with free speech and academic independence on Wednesday. Whether the conference will in fact be called off or restructured, I really don't know, but we're certainly going to try.
Can I thank Jonathan for his efforts there? Attempts actually to rouse the Vice-Chancellor have so far proved rather without success, so I wish you all luck, and all the communal institutions are most concerned about this. The next person who had Denise Lester had.
Mr. President, Honorary Officers, Board, Denise Lester, South Hampstead, United Synagogue. I'm a deputy in the most marginal seat in the country. I've been to the local hustings. This remark arises directly out of the meeting. I was particularly concerned, and I'm apolitical, I was particularly concerned by the Minister's position on behalf of the Tory party that they could not confirm that they would not withdraw from the European Convention on Human Rights, which protects the rights of minorities. As Jews, one of our key tenets is the pursuit of justice. The rationale given was judicial overreach. As a practicing solicitor and one who is concerned in connection with the access to justice, the withdrawal of the European Convention on Human Rights on the basis of potential judicial overreach smacks of creeping totalitarianism. I respectfully request that the board actually lobbies the Conservative government to reconsider their position, which is a populist position, which has been propounded in certain elements of the media, because the judiciary in this country do not interfere in the business of government unless it's through the mechanism of judicial review or where there is an impact and an effect on the administration of justice. Our judiciary is clearly separate, and for that to be a rationale for withdrawing the European Convention of Human Rights, I'm sorry, it interferes with the pursuit of justice, which is one of the key of Judaism. And we abide by the rule of the law in this country as a community, and long may we, should we do so. Thank you.
Bernard Silver.
I just want to make Bernard Silver, Western Marble Arch Synagogue. I'd like to just mention on the whole business of the European Human Rights Code that the Home Secretary is on record as having said she would like to withdraw from, that it's not only about judicial overkill and votes for prisoners. It also gives us the right to follow our religion, among other very basic human rights that are not enshrined in British law even at all, since we have no written constitution.
Rosalind Pine.
Rosalind Pine, North Salford Synagogue. My question to you, Mr. President, is how has it come to this, that the President of the Deputies finds himself in Cambridge University, the pinnacle of our intellectual elite, defending a motion that this House believes that Israel is a rogue state? And it really is telling about Jewish leadership. And first of all, I would like to make a comment, because I often hear it said that we are the Board of Deputies of British Jews, and it's not really our business what happens in Israel. Several points, apart from the small matter that it's in our constitution that we have to take active, positive hold the security, welfare, and good name of Israel. Apart from the fact that we are one people, Kol Israel Arevim Ze Lo Ze, and apart from the fact it's morally right to defend Israel, it happens to be, as Alex said this morning, that now anti-Semitism and anti-Israelism has become synonymous. And I just would like to mention a very interesting panel event at the Central Synagogue a few weeks ago in February, in which there were 3 panelists, all very good friends of ours, and they made interesting observations. The first was Brendan O'Neill, who observed that attacks on Jews in this country are greeted with indifference, unlike attacks on Muslims, which the opinion-forming elite take very seriously. The second was Douglas Murray, who commented on the weak Jewish leadership of our communal bodies. But the most interesting was Majid Nawaz. And he said, he was very upset, and I asked his permission to repeat this. He said, when the Jewish leadership aligns itself with people like the Muslim Council of Britain, it undermines the work of people like him who are for us and who is on the Quilliam anti-extremist organization. And he said that we should be much careful with whom we ally ourselves. And that is my comment.
Thank you. I'm going to take a question from Sir Ivan Lawrence, and behind it was that Louis, and then I'll answer, and then we'll take more questions after that. Sir Ivan.
Yes, I'd like to just correct the impression that's been given or taken up by Denise and others that the policy of the Conservative Party at the next election is to do away with our principles of human rights. It's nonsense. It's only called withdrawal from the convention because the convention also includes the requirement that we should have as the final court of appeal the European Court of Human Rights. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a withdrawal from the European Convention. The object is to substitute for the present international system with an ultimate court of the European Convention of Human Rights for our own national system incorporating all of the principles of the European Convention of Human Rights, save the right of final appeal to a European court that is made up of a lot of non-lawyers who don't understand the cultural conventions of Britain, and replacing the conventions which we follow with our own Supreme Court with some sort of system which pays no attention to our Parliament and pays no attention to our own judges. And the examples were given of the voting rights as an example. So let's do away with this nonsense that Denise was putting to you, that we're going to do away with support for the convention principles. We're going to follow all the convention principles. And Bernard then stood up and said that we were going to threaten somehow Jewish rights. It has nothing to do with threatening of Jewish rights. And let's have a balanced view about it. The only argument for which there are two sides on sustaining our membership of the European Convention of Human Rights is whether it gives a bad signal to Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, and anybody else who wants to join the European Convention. And frankly, I don't care what signal it gives to them, and I think most of the British public don't care what impression it gives to them either.
Thank you for that, Ivan. Louis.
Thank you. Louis Rappaport, Manchester Reformed Synagogue.
Denise, there is a certain decorum in this assembly. When you're called on to speak, you may speak, but please don't heckle.
Mr. President, may I draw attention to your remarks?
Louis, could you give your name and constituency?
Sorry?
He did. I'm sorry. See,
Louis Rappaport, Manchester Reformed Synagogue.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I've been interrupted by the heckler. Right, carry on.
May I draw attention to your remarks about the launch of the Stand Together conference? I'm delighted to learn that London has followed Manchester, because we launched the programme the previous Thursday, because this was an idea of Sir Peter Farhade, our Chief Constable, together with others, whose idea was based on the experience in our city. And it was because of that he introduced the event, and there were over 200 people present in the Manchester Town Hall for the announcement. Manchester's a true record of standing together, as exemplified by the actions in dealing with Cadem. I'm not mentioning this to score points, Mr. President, of Manchester over London, but just to emphasise that Sir Peter's idea is for the idea of Stand Together to be taken up by all communities throughout the country. And I would urge representatives from the regions to go back to their cities and try and implement the same idea in their city.
Thank you very much. I'm going to answer the questions that have been the points have been raised so far. So people who've had their hands up, you will hopefully get a chance to be called on to speak. Several of the speakers have raised the question of the European Convention on Human Rights. There is no doubt here about our goals. We obviously want to see religious freedom protected, and we want to see fundamental human rights protected. There is a debate between the parties as to whether we are advantaged by having the European Court having a say over what government does and effectively judicial outreach from them. I don't think this is a particularly Jewish point of view as to whether we want to delegate those powers to the European courts or not. It is one on which Jews can and should have very strong opinions, but it's not one on which the Board of Deputies should be taking a line qua the representatives of the community. So we've heard arguments on both sides of this meeting just now, and we heard arguments from MPs, and they were cogent. I thought the arguments on both sides were cogent. It's not, obviously I have a view myself, but it's not for us actually to take a line qua the Jewish community on an issue like this on which Jews are quite entitled. Appreciate those arguments, but I'm not going to comment further on them. I'm not going to in any way to criticize them. Rosalind Pine. Rosalind, I had some difficulty. You queried why I went to Cambridge. Well, yes, I don't want to sort of alarm people, but there are a lot of people out there who are critical of the actions of the Israeli government and regard it as a rogue state. Therefore, they call these debates naturally, and as you appreciate, we, as the Board of Deputies of British Jews, have to go and respond to these challenges. And the challenges are only going to get greater. And what you're saying, Rosalind, is why should they be arguing whether Israel's a rogue state when the neighboring country, Syria, has caused it's gone over 200,000, 250,000 fatalities, when Egypt on the other side can sentence 500 people to death in an afternoon, where Iraq is in such a terrible state, and where the situation on human rights in Iran and the mayhem that they're promoting around the world is just so enormous. And all these points were made, obviously, and the fact that Netanyahu's probably best supporters for the suggestion of a military intervention in Iran are actually in the Arab world, who see the menace that Iran poses to other Arab states. And the fact, and here I'm going to just sort of develop the point a little further, that the greatest political challenge which is facing us in the world is the challenge of worldwide Islamism and jihadism, which is now a phenomenon both in West Africa, in South Asia, in East Asia, and in the West from people there. So naturally, we were very upset that this motion was proposed in that way. We're upset to see the extent of anti-Israel agitation on campus, and naturally disappointed that we came second in the debate. But it was of the barest majority supporting it. I would say people should read the Jewish Chronicles report, which is accurate, though didn't state the full thing. Yes, my second speaker was the leader of Yachad, who spoke quite eloquently, I felt, but we do have to learn lessons about how to conduct the debates, and above all, if you're going into a forum, do respect the rules of the forum, do respect the chairman of debate, and do respect your audience. So the people, if they're going to decide against you, should decide against you because you've argued, because they don't like your arguments, not because you've argued badly or rudely or in defiance of their rules. Thank you. Any more questions? So that's Elliot Jabril. And then you. Yes.
Elliot Jabril, I can hear myself really loud. Elliot Jabril, Deputy of Hampscon Suburbs Synagogue. As we all know, in the next few months, we should hopefully be seeing quite a lot of change in the makeup of deputies with quite a high turnover. I was just wondering what plans we're starting to put in place for when new deputies do start in the next few months, to really make sure that we are taking the right information from them and we are going to be engaging with deputies properly over the next 3 years. I remember when I started as a deputy, we had a particulars form that we filled in that asked for a whole bunch of information from deputies, but haven't really heard anything since off the back of that. So I just want to make sure that we are taking the time now to prepare for 300 odd, hopefully new people who will be focused, who we can use, who are all interested, who are all turning up to be involved in the Jewish community.
Elliot, I think it's a very fair point. It's a point that's made at the beginning of every plenary, that new deputies need mentoring, the put in place, and also general guidance and a board plan, etc. And these things are obviously ones which the honorary officers and executive of the board are thinking about very carefully at the moment. So I do hope that those will be implemented by my successor. Now, the gentleman who's had his hand up on the aisle, yes, you. The chappie with your hand, with the glasses. Sorry, I can't see. On the big kippah.
Thank you. Dario Chalaski, the Union of Jewish Students. Just on the latter point that you made when answering questions, perhaps a suggestion would be when you're engaging with a younger audience, for instance, on university campuses, perhaps take a younger member of the board with you or discuss with them so that you know best how to appeal to that audience. And also on the European Court of Human Rights, I think it's fundamentally bad that you're saying that we shouldn't have a view on this as the Board of Deputies, because the European Court of Human Rights has actually made landmark cases for disabled people and LGBT people. And I'm very conscious, as probably the only transgender person in this room, that although transgender people and lesbian, gay, bisexual people are a minority within the Jewish community, we are still part of the community, and it's important that we protect that. And also with the prevalence of disability within the Jewish community, which isn't talked about, but things like Tay-Sachs disease, disability is huge within our community, so we need to acknowledge that and show solidarity to LGBT people and disabled people within the Jewish community and be supporting the European Court of Human Rights, because if we withdraw, you won't have the protections that we've seen, like when the Tory government assessed people that were terminally ill as being fit to work. They actually took them to the European Court of Human Rights, and that's how they won compensation for the government killing these people by not letting them have any money.
Mike Samuels.
Michael Samuels, South Manchester Synagogue.
Mr. President, over the last few years during your tenure, although I've agreed with you on many things, we have disagreed perhaps on the attitude of the board to the regional deputies. And I know that we're coming to the end of your tenure, and I salute you for the amount of hard work and your commitment to the Jewish community in general. I would like to ask through you, I would like to ask both your vice presidents if they are planning to have hustings in the regions, and during these hustings, what difference are they going to make for the regions to the board? Thank you.
Right. I'm going to deal with these questions that have been raised so far. I'm sure you... Okay, just in answer to the last point, Mike, because Johnny's just been telling me something which I would appreciated already. Presidential candidates will welcome hustings, and there are two candidates for presidency, and I don't know whether the vice presidential candidates will be involved as well. But when I stood 6 years ago almost, we had hustings in Manchester, and they will welcome the opportunity to speak in Manchester. We really do take the region seriously. It's terribly difficult. I mean, I was saying earlier, I'm a deputy with very strong regional roots, and it's something which is, there are many things about being President of the Board of Deputies which are really, really great. And one of them has been the regional footprint of the board, and going to communities outside London and seeing how they cope with their own particular challenges, which we do not have here in London. And I've been continually impressed by the energy, the ingenuity, and the sheer fun that goes on outside London in the regional communities. And it's a pleasure, I mean, I think for any president actually to experience that. There is a particular issue with Manchester, which is the largest Jewish community outside London and is extremely vibrant. We are trying to make contact always with the Haredi community there, with whom we are in contact, but with the general community. Unfortunately, Manchester is underrepresented on the board, and we really would like to see that rectified. I did make a trip to Manchester very early on in my presidency with Jerry Lewis, trying to recruit schools in Manchester to get them to send their deputies. I went with you, probably as another occasion, I went with Lawrence. There you are. Yeah, there was certainly... I certainly remember that occasion. I remember going with Lawrence more recently when we actually had a discussion with the Manchester Rep Council on issues, and we've been trying to recruit people there, and it is important. It's something we take very seriously. That's why I said in my revised presidential statement that I was concerned that there has not been a regional meeting so far. I don't really think it should be laid at the door of the board. We had some difficulty, and Laura would like to add, because I know she is working valiantly to have a regional meeting in the autumn.
Thank you, Michael, for the question. Just a couple of quick things, points of interest. First of all, immediately after this meeting, for anyone who doesn't know, we're having a meeting at the County Hotel, which is specifically to talk about Jewish Connection, which is the project that we set up 2 years ago now, specifically to look at small communities and how to support them. So if you're a regional deputy, or indeed any deputy who's interested in the development of your community, smaller communities in particular, but anybody, then please do join us at that meeting. And secondly, as Vivian said, we are working with the Manchester deputies, and thank you all of them, to have a meeting in October. 4 communities volunteered to have the meeting now this week in their communities. They all fell apart for various good reasons, but we're hoping to have something in October in Manchester. So we do take it very, very seriously, and thank you for raising it.
I'd like to point out that the project Jewish Connection is something that's brought the board closer to grassroots communities which can't actually afford the services of a minister. And one of the innovations is that these communities should be serviced not from London, but from the nearest big Jewish hub. And it's obviously done a huge amount for them, and it's just another one of these unsung stories of the work that the board has done. Daniel Lashke of Union Jewish Students. Yes, I think what's important is when speakers go out, they, as I said, they do respect the atmosphere of the chamber where they're debating and the mores of it. And they actually try and listen to what the people, you go into debates to win them, not to sort of moralize about the other speakers. You said also about LGBT, we do respect that. There are obviously different views in the community about LGBT. We would be very happy, and I've said so personally myself, if they were represented on the board. I think it's a very important cause. I think we as Jews, as a minority who face persecution, do not realize the extent of the problem of people of LGBT, and the fact that, unlike us, they don't often belong to a segregated community from which they can derive moral support. This arose when I was standing for vice president, and I was proud to state then, and I reiterate it now, my support for that community. Now, we've had a number of people who wanted to raise questions. Paul, and I've got Malvin, and then... These are still on the President's statement, please. But I'm taking people who've got comments. Most of them seem to be able to relate loosely to it. And then after these, I'll take questions on the executive report.
Paul Edlin, Glasgow Jewish Representative Council. I want to refer to Michael Samuel's question and the responses. I accept that the board is doing a lot for the regions, but they're not doing very much for regional deputies who this triennial have been subjected to a lot of problems in travel, the fact that divisional board meetings are not being held at all in this triennial on Sundays, except for the initial meeting. And this is a subject which is causing a certain amount of demoralizing amongst the regional deputies. The last thing, the final straw, of course, was a cancellation of the regional meeting. We all have heard there's going to be one in the autumn in Manchester. This was a bungled affair. The fact of the matter is, autumn is not a good time for these meetings because it's winter coming on, it's cold, it's difficult to travel, and it's in the next triennium anyway. So those who are leaving at the end of this triennium will not get their regional meeting. Now, this is not a trivial point for these deputies. They're travelling a long way. I've heard some contributions from Alex Brummer, and when he was up in the regions in Glasgow saying what he would do. I'd like to hear more, because the present situation for the regional deputies is quite unacceptable.
Thank you. Malvin.
Malvin Benjamin, Hendon United Synagogue. I'd like to follow on from Paul and what Michael Samuels has said. I'm very conscious of the fact that this board is really a London-centric board. And I think this is extremely unfortunate. I'm very conscious of the fact that from time to time, I sit in meetings here and about, 11:30, 11:45, the provincial delegates come in because they have not been accommodated from their train times and from their travel. And no real effort seems to have been put in to embrace, in plenary sessions anyway, provincial delegates coming in from outside of London. Some time ago, you may remember, when the chief rabbi came here to speak, by the time he finished, the out-of-London delegates still had not arrived. And I just think that it is really deplorable that we do not make the sustained effort that we need to make to embrace everybody within the community. Sure, it's very easy to come down from Hendon or from Golders Green or from Ilford, but the fact of the matter is that if we talk about a board of deputies of British Jews, we must remember all the time that it is of British Jews and not merely of London Jews. Thank you.
Colin, the gentleman behind over there.
Dan Reisel Yachad. I just want to comment in agreement with both Rosalind Pine and Jim Wyman's comments about...
Could you use the mic? We've not... What would you say?
It's not on. Yes, it's on. Sorry.
Name and constituency.
Right. So I just want to
name
briefly
constituency,
comment.
please, for the record.
Dan Reisel Yachad. Dan Reisel Yachad. I just want to comment very briefly to say that both Rosalind Pine's and Environment's points are vital for us to be mindful of the fact that we have come to a state in this country that Cambridge Union, of which I was a member a number of years ago, not only puts up a motion labeling Israel a rogue state, but that the motion actually passes, I think is a wake-up call for all of us. And Yachad works on campus day in and day out to try to make the case in a nuanced way, and in the way that both our submission at that debate and Vivian Wyman's submissions, I think the reason why it was listened to by many in the hall was because we were able to put across our point in a way that was convincing. What was problematic on our side was a very hostile speech from the third member of our panel, and I think it underlines how important it is to continue our work on campus to make our to change the atmosphere that is currently prevailing.
Thank you. Harvey Rose, and then I'll answer these questions. We'll have another round.
Thank you. Harvey Rose, the Zionist Federation. I just wanted to perhaps suggest to the board that if they find themselves in a position of having to mount a very strong pro-Israel argument at a conference such as the one at Cambridge, I think there are more appropriate organizations and individuals than Yachad who could present a much stronger case for Israel.
Okay, I'll deal with these questions now. First of all, Malvin, and echoing Mike Samuel's questions, we have very difficult balance to strike. And almost all the exciting events that we need to do, we're continually looking over our shoulder, what will the regional deputies think of this and how will they be affected? When we had Ed Miliband come and speak to the board, and this is a major event, leader of one of the two main political parties actually addressing the board, not a dinner for the board, but the board itself. There was a whole issue of whether we could have this in view of the fact that it's difficult for regional deputies. We've moved the times of our plenaries in the morning later and later to accommodate regional deputies. And I know it's very difficult, and I hear what you say, Paul. Much of my family live in the regions, and they always say it's not fair. The distance from Sunderland to London, from Manchester to London, seems to be so much smaller than the distance from London to Sunderland or London to Manchester. And it seems very unfair. And I realise you come 400 miles for every meeting at the board, and it's difficult. On the other hand, London, of course, is where the vast majority of deputies are actually based, and it's where obviously political activity of this country takes place. We're always considering, the weighing up the balances, and I must say the HOs in this triennium have been tireless in going all over the provinces to try and bring the message of the board to deputies in the regions. So it's something that I'm afraid there is no quick answer to it, but you're listened to. There's no question that the candidates for president the next triennium will be willing to come to Hustings, to Manchester, and the board will continue to have to juggle all those requirements of deputies from all over the country to try and make sure that these arrangements are convenient to as many people as possible. At the end of the day, you would not be able to please everyone. That's absolutely certain. Daniel and Harvey Rose have both raised the question of the union debate. I agree with Daniel. If you're going to want to win a debate, you've got to actually address the debate. it's not the board or the community which selects the speakers. It was the union which selected the speakers. It was the union which selected the opponents, and they were the ones who chose the speakers on our side. If you want to convince the middle ground, then you have to try and appeal to it. So if you want to convince people outside, you need to show Israel's credentials as a democratic state. And that may have been, I don't know for certain, that may have been the logic of inviting somebody from Yachad who are, as they say, pro-Israel and pro-peace. I have to say that when a speaker comes to a debate and begins his speech with an attack, a personal attack on the speakers from the other side, and is then admonished by the chair of the debate not to do so, and then continues to do so, he's not actually going in the sort of direction that's likely to lead to success. Now, you want to win debates when you go to them, and part of your assessment of how you're doing is the response that people make while you're talking. I was very heartened by the applause when I finished speaking, that when Hannah finished speaking, and I'm afraid the speakers on the other side also got reasonably well applauded. I didn't think they got quite as much as we did, but that's just subjective. But the third speaker on our side did not get any applause at all. He got booed, and the only thing you could hear was, with friends like that, who needs, etc. But it was somebody else made this point. It was not someone from the board, it was from the Henry Jackson Society. And I think if you're going to present Israel's case to an audience like that, you do need to stress its democratic credentials and to understand the sort of arguments that you're being faced with. And it was unfortunate that arguments were made on the other side by their third speaker which were not answered. Israel's need to defend itself and the fact that 4,000 rockets were fired at Israel during the summer by Hamas with the intention of causing as much damage as possible. I don't think this point was actually grasped by the audience. Having said that, I think there can be few debates where the speeches make less impact on the audience. People come into the debates with their minds very firmly made up. So it was a difficult task, but I'm afraid I think we lost part of the audience there. Now I have two hands up there, then Jonathan Davis, but two hands at the back. First of all, yeah. Louis Trupp, yes.
Thank you, David Behrens, JNF. I'm coming back on my question to the President, which was answered in relation to the involvement of Congress on the issue of BDS. And having attended APAC on behalf of JNF, I'm very pleased to report that the Americans definitely get it on the issues which are of great concern to Jews in Europe and obviously in Britain with regard to the rise in anti-Semitism and the BDS issue. And I think if no action is taken on both those fronts, then congressional leadership will get involved. It was something that was raised by Senator Lindsey Graham in the Maine General Assembly, and it was also raised by other congressmen in some of the breakout sessions. For your information, the United States Israel Trade and Commercial Enhancement Act can be Googled, and the details are available. One issue which perhaps is the elephant in the room is that it makes it very clear that it will oppose BDS not only in relation to the state of Israel, but also in any territory controlled by Israel. So that's not going to allow those who are mealy-mouthed and disingenuous, who say that they're against BDS, but when it relates to goods from the settlements, they're in favor of it. Very clear that that won't wash with Congress.
Thank you.
Hi there, Louis Trupp, Deputy for B'nai B'rith Youth Organisation. And I wanted to respond to some of the comments about the Cambridge Union debate. I, in my day job, am the president of the Oxford University Student Union. And I wanted to pick up on a point made by the deputy for the ZF. Don't come to campus because you will lose, because the people who will win this debate are students. We know the structures of these debates, and we know how campus is working. We know the atmosphere and what you need to tap into. That is the expertise we need to use. And with a Cambridge Union debate, it was those who were invited to speak, and that is completely fair. But in terms of the wider debates, when we have boycott, divestment and sanctions coming to student union councils, as it did to mine 1.5 weeks ago, the people who need to be speaking are the Union of Jewish Students. And so if you do want to speak on this on campuses, go through them, because otherwise you'll be undermining the work of the students who are working very hard on this by bringing in the petty squabbles within our community and putting them out and not putting forward a coherent message to the students that we want to influence on this.
Mervyn Smith, Sutton District Synagogue. I'd like to go back to the financial report of last month and
Mervyn, that's fine. Can I just deal with these questions that have been asked on this issue, and then we'll take your question later. Thank you. To David Behrens, on the question of the congressional bill. Yes, it's a great idea. As far as the distinction between a settlement boycott and a full boycott is concerned, I take the point entirely. A settlement boycott is almost impossible to distinguish from a full boycott. They have a sort of slogan of purity of supply. Many of the settlements which would be boycotted are ones which the Palestinian Authority have agreed should remain under Israeli control in the event of a peace settlement. And of course, it is just putting in hand the infrastructure for a full boycott. So the policy of the board has been, regardless of our attitude to settlements, and I must stress that the board does not have a view on settlements. There are members of the board who think the settlements are a good thing. There are members of the board who think they're anything but. But we are opposed to a boycott of settlement goods. That is board policy, and we really see that the way in which they slide into full boycott. Louis Trupp, yes, I agree that these debates inside students' unions have obviously got to be conducted by the students. A union debate is something rather different, where they bring in outside celebrity speakers. What I would suggest is that we are careful and in who we send as a community, and we must try and actually appeal to students as we have to appeal to society generally on grounds which they will understand. Okay, do we have any more questions on the President's statement? Or on any of those, Jonathan Davis, and I'll also take questions on those questions which have been submitted to me and have been answered. Thanks.
Jonathan Davis, Golders Green United Synagogue. We need to recognise that the Palestinian lobby is an extremely effective and powerful lobby as compared to anything we are at the moment able to achieve. I'm at the moment a parliamentary candidate, and parliamentary candidates receive large amounts of constituents and pressure group correspondence. With all the political issues facing the United Kingdom today, the lobby group from which I've received the largest amount of correspondence, all identical pro formas incidentally, is the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign. I therefore strongly echo your comments in your written report, President, on the importance of deputies contacting their prospective MPs. There are a lot of prospective parliamentary candidates who probably know where Israel and the Middle East is, but not a lot more, and they need to be taught. And if they're only hearing from the PSC, that will be a disaster for us in the next Parliament.
Any other points on the President's report or the answers, the questions that were tabled with it? Jonathan, if I can answer you, yes, it's absolutely right. I've got bad news for deputies. The effectiveness of the PSC will be greatly enhanced as a result of the vote in the Commons last year. They've expanded their reach enormously, and we are going to see them as even more effective lobbyists than they have been so far. I think it's most unfortunate. Even MPs from constituencies with a large Jewish element report that they get far more correspondence and far more lobbying from the pro-Palestinian side than they do from the pro-Israeli side. Now, there is a not so malign reason for this. We basically are standing for the status quo, and the Palestinians basically are the sort of revolutionary group who are trying to upset the status quo, trying to reform it. But that it is nevertheless a very unfortunate fact, and it results that some of these basic points that have been made earlier seem to be overlooked. Any questions now on the rest of the report or on the executive report? And then David Farby, and then Lionel. Oh yeah, Mervyn Smith, yes. Sorry, Mervyn, I cut you off.
Mervyn Smith Sutton. I sent in a question, scanned it through last Wednesday. It wasn't on the listing, so if I may read it out and amplify it. The report by the Treasurer was inept, confirming that management accounts were not available, and there would be a potential loss. There are disputes on expenses, which suggests poor control at best. F&O are supposed to monitor finances and have patently failed what action is to be taken. I then receive the report of the executive meeting, which states that on this occasion, the F&O will not submit a report, as they reported in detail at the February plenary. Well, I certainly couldn't appreciate that as having been circulated as a full report. There is also the question with regard to expenses and the statement in your presidential report which states that the President added that the executive authorizes all expenditure, not all members of divisions agree, but everyone accepts majority decisions. I do not consider that to be a proper management control of finances. The only figures that have been circulated or spoken about from the Finance Committee has been the income. And if anybody, and certainly people on the top table, are aware of how businesses are run or even charities are run, income is only one factor. It doesn't determine success or otherwise. And we have not had any figures with regard to budget, any figures with regard to expenditure, over which there is acknowledged to be disputes. And I think that deputies are deserving of a full confirmation that there will be proper management control, which obviously does not presently take place. Otherwise, members would have received the courtesy of regular figures showing the movements within the funds of this body. Thank you.
I'm going to ask Chief Executive Gillian Meron to answer some of these points, but I must refute a lot of this stuff. We're always looking to improve controls, but there is no way that any money is spent by the board without proper control and authorization. It has two HOs have to sign off for all expenses. As for accounts, management accounts are issued. There's been a very lively debate on the latest set of management accounts. They are being scrutinized. I had a lot of comments on them myself. We are looking for ways always to improve reporting and accounting, but any suggestion that there is sort of spending willy-nilly is just complete nonsense. It just isn't in the real world. In every organization, there is continually going to be a debate, like we have a debate over how we deal with regional deputies and London deputies, so similarly on how we spend money, whether particular objectives are worthwhile or not. And lots of people would like to spend much less. Lots of people have ideas about promoting the work of the board. But the idea that there is no proper control, that things slip through, is completely untrue. There is a budget. I'll actually pass over to Gillian to talk more about that, but and we are continuing addressing with our auditors the need to have tighter financial controls. But as it says in the executive report, the board's finances have never been in as healthy a state as they are at the moment, and we intend to make sure that they remain so. So I'll now pass over to Jim.
Can I just, on a matter of information, Mr. President, just say to Mervyn that I saw your question this week. I sent an answer to the President. I don't know why it wasn't published, but the factual point I wanted to make to you was your question suggested that I had said last month that management accounts were not available. I said no such thing. I very much have had management accounts, and indeed not only are we getting them now monthly, we're getting them even more frequently, and they are being very, very closely monitored. I did not say that we have no management accounts. I want to make that absolutely clear. How on earth could we run the organisation without management accounts? We get them, we scrutinise them, we monitor them very, very carefully.
I'm very sorry that the Treasurer's reply wasn't sent out with the papers.
I'm only taking the words that are used from the executive report and from the President's report. I haven't used the willy-nilly term.
Well, okay,
management accounts are stated as potentially in the future. There are now weekly cash management accounts. Cash management accounts. When do deputies get the benefit and the courtesy of receiving equivalent information so they can see figuratively all the benefits that you are suggesting mature to the finances of the Board of Deputies?
Well, the accounts are always presented in July, and you'll get a full set of accounts there. It's not obviously the practice to send out detailed management accounts to all deputies. I'm going to hand over to Gillian.
You stated last plenary session that there would be quarterly accounts.
Well,
if I heard it correctly.
We've actually got monthly management
accounts.
accounts.
No, I'm talking about the deputies which come to a plenary. They're entitled to that similar information.
Absolutely not. Deputies are entitled to see audited accounts, which have gone through the full process. Management accounts are not audited. They're prepared by the internal financial accounting function of the board. And the important thing is that the people who are the executive arm of the board scrutinise those accounts carefully, which I can assure you we do. And there has been quite a lot of discussion to make sure that those accounts will be accurate in the future. But we don't, anything that goes out to the deputies is totally, I mean, it's obviously public domain, but we don't send out unaudited accounts, ordinary internal management of stuff to all deputies. We've never done so. No charity does so.
So what is the benefit of Lawrence Brass quoting only income without the benefit of expenditure and suggesting what the potential loss is likely to be?
I don't believe he did so. Lawrence, do you want to...
No, I didn't do so. I don't know what he's talking about.
No.
That's what was discussed at the last meeting.
On Friday. We're having audit on the 23rd of
I'm not
March,
discussing when you have an audit.
Draft accounts sent to the F&O, will then go to the trustees and will then be presented to this plenary in the usual way that has happened since time immemorial.
All I'm taking is
thank
the
you,
fact
Mervyn. I think
that
you've had
have problems
Mervyn,
with agreeing expenditure.
I've extended you the courtesy of allowing you to ask a supplementary question. That's as far as I can go. I would like Gillian just to comment on the
Thank you. Just to add to the points made, I think it's important to distinguish facts from concerns. And just to be quite clear, management accounts are, of course, to manage the situation. The issue is about audited accounts. And as the Treasurer has stated, they will, as always, come in July. They are also publicly available, as is required of us as a body. And I would also like to assure deputies that we had a very useful meeting with the auditors on Friday, and that was myself, Lawrence, the Treasurer, and also Jonathan Davis on behalf of the F&O. And there were not immediate concerns being raised. In fact, on the contrary, they were very helpful in terms of advice in that the forms of budgets that can be approved, what budgets are for. They are not documents to sit on a shelf. They are to be revised, updated and worked within, and also to confirm about it does worry me the discussion about there are no financial controls. That is absolutely not the case. But more than that, I'm also working closely with the auditors to ensure that the requirements are complete. They haven't expressed any concerns, but I wish to assure myself. So the facts are that matters are properly controlled. People do not spend money they should not and has not been authorised. If anyone has examples, I'm sure they will bring them either to me or to the Treasurer.
Right. Thank you. We've had this. Oh, sorry. Eric Moonman's had his.
I'm still mindful of the fact it's getting close. Eric Moonman, Belsize Square. It may be very close to 1:30, but and we may have comments that we might want to make, and they'll have to be left over for other meetings. But it would be so wrong of us not to take this moment to thank you as President, and the fact that this is your last meeting in the chair. I mean, that is so. I did a bit of a survey before, and several people said, no, he's going to be there next time, and others said, and the time after that. But I think I'm right that this will be your last meeting, and it would be so wrong if we didn't say thank you formally for a long stint through all sorts of wonderful moments and also for disagreements. And you and I have had those, and we're still back there, and we're still members of the board. As a senior officer, I felt myself years ago that what was the life after the Board of Deputies? There is a life, and I know you're not giving up in as many interests that you have. But I'm mindful this will be a shortened version of a thank you, but it's well meant. And I would ask everyone to show their appreciation for those 6 years.
Thank you very much for those very kind words, Eric. We occasionally don't see things the same way, but I've had always enormous appreciation for the work which you've done, both for the board and also for the community, and in particular the lobbying that's arranged on behalf of the Zionist, both the Christian Friends of Zionism and the Zionist Federation themselves. I think that's so valuable. And I must say, it's not strictly speaking my last meeting. It's the last business meeting that I will be chairing. The next meeting, which I'm sure will be well attended, is the third election. We might consider it the most important. I was going to explain to the candidates that we have a much more important election than their election, taking place 10 days after it. And that actually, that will be the final meeting. And I must say, it does bring me just to think, and I have been over the last few weeks, just what an important organisation we are, and what a privilege it has been to be your president for the last 6 years. There are obviously challenges that the board faces within the community, and the challenges which the community faces as a whole. But we do live in a country where we are very well treated and well accepted, and I think we face those challenges extremely well. And one point which has been made about the community is the extent to which it punches beyond its weight. And that has been manifest not only in our religious leadership, but particularly in our secular leadership. And the other faith communities are very envious of the fact that there is a board of deputies which seeks to speak for the entire community and has really tried to avoid any kind of factionalism and tried to represent all sections of the community. And if I can, I want to be brief here, I have to. I think the officers of the board have shown this, and I think above all the staff have shown this, that we are reaching out even to those parts of the community that are not fully represented on the board, in particular to the Haredi community. And our relations with the Haredi community, by their testimony, have never been as good as they are now. So we're in a situation where we're facing the challenges, and there will be bigger challenges. And there will be challenges also with other organizations in the community and how we relate to them. But they will see of the board, which I think is stronger than ever. Its financial position is stronger than ever. And its new premises, I think, give it excellent opportunities. We are now working closer with the other organizations in the community. I wouldn't say that the future is bright for the community, because I think the community faces many challenges. But the community has a vitality which is absolutely extraordinary among diaspora communities. We are the home of so many new great innovations in jewellery, and the board is right at the heart of those, things like Limud and Book Week, etc., which the board has been involved in. And inside actual board initiatives, things like Jewish Connection, Bodsar, our various initiatives on anti-Semitism, our big stand on the international scene. The Jewish community in Britain is the most respected in Europe in terms of its lobbying, its understanding of the political situation in its country. Our European manifesto was an example to all the other Jewish communities. So in terms of EJC and WJC work, we are, again, very, very respected as a well-organized and very vital community, as shown also in our work on things like Holocaust retribution. I can see there's a question from the back. Oh, Sheila wanted, yes. Of course.
Thank you. Sheila Gewald, Cardiff United Synagogue. Sorry, I'm not always on my feet, but I'm got my dinner hat on at this point. There's an item in the executive report that says, first of all, that deputies under 30s will be able to come to the board's president's dinner for £100. It's actually under 35s, not under 30s. Secondly, I'm down as being the deputy for Cardiff. I'm only one of the deputies for Cardiff. My very competent friend Stanley Soffer is the representative for the Cardiff Reform Shawl. The second thing I'd like to mention very briefly is that Ephraim Borofsky is very privileged to be able to report on the goings-on in the Scottish community because he's on the executive. In Cardiff and in South Wales, or all of Wales, we also have lots of things going on, and I would like to welcome the opportunity with Stanley to write a report that goes out with the executive report every time it's printed, because there's lots of things going on there that I think deputies should know about. And thirdly, I'm really afraid that on behalf of the F&O members who are outraged this morning, especially, and I was present when the two presidential candidates said that the problems on the F&O is that nobody's an accountant and they don't know how to read a balance sheet. I was insulted on behalf of the competent accountants we have on the F&O, and the problem is not with spending being authorised, it's the accountability to the F&O that is not coming through. We find about expenditure after it's been happened, and this has been going on for a long time, and I'm sorry to end on a contentious note. I believe the Treasurer has mentioned this on several occasions, but I hope going forward that we have somebody strong to lead the F&O who will stand up for what the F&O is supposed to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Sheila. Can I begin by, sorry, we gave you the definite article in making you the deputy for Cardiff, your indefinite article. But the most important point is the one that you mentioned about the dinner. We had a deficit on income last year because we didn't have a dinner. It's fundamental to the fundraising of the board. It's a great event. The board gets the most tremendous speakers at its dinner. This time we have the Archbishop of Canterbury, the leading religious figure in this country, who is coming as our guest. It's an excellent opportunity. Deputies have a concessionary rate for tickets at the dinner, so it's virtually, they're coming at cost. There is an even cheaper rate for under 35s. I beg your pardon that it was the misleading under 30s. There will be plenty of deputies who will get a chance, obviously, to join in tables. We do hope as many of you as possible come to the dinner and get support for it. It is not just a significant fundraising event, and we need that, but it is also a chance to showcase the achievements of the board. The video that will be displayed at the dinner will be displayed also at the following board meeting. They're great occasions, and I do hope as many deputies as possible come, and I also hope that as many of you as possible manage to sell tickets to get your friends to come to publicise the work of the board and our importance to the community. I think on that note, it's the best note actually to end this afternoon. Can I just thank all deputies for coming. I hope you appreciated the hustings. This is what the board should be doing, and please God, we'll be doing it for the next election and many to come. Thank you.